First of all, welcome to the monthly presentation. We're doing a special date and time because of all the holidays. And I also want to say that when Lewis asked me to do this, I don't think either of us realized this was going to fall between Passover and Good Friday and Easter Sunday. So the topic is unintentionally appropriate.
Inappropriate.
And so what I've been doing for the past 6 years is researching the history of Judaism and Christianity and its impact on the Western world for a book that I'm now looking to publish, if anybody happens to know of an agent, hint, hint. And this particular presentation comes out of that work. So I'm going to share the screen now, if I can. And we're going to talk about why the Jews won't accept Jesus and why this is a problem for the Christian.
Mm-hmm.
So let me begin with the historical background.
Oh, it just started. That's good.
Oh, can't change that.
Everybody can hear me, I hope.
Yes.
Yes.
How do I do the volume? Oh,
Okay, well, we just started, Rosemary.
No.
Oh,
Right.
Everybody can feel free to mute.
Yeah. This is also being recorded for publication. That is, the presentation part will be on YouTube for anybody to see, and the question and answer period that follows will be available only to members. This was a recent decision the board took, and this is the first time we're trying that one too. So, back again, why won't the Jews accept Jesus, and why this is a problem for Christians? We begin with the historical background. Herod the Great, king of all of Judea and Samaria and Galilee, and basically all the colorful parts of this map except the brown part. He died in the year 4 BCE. I'm using BCE, CE before the Common Era. That's standard notation these days. And Rome divided his territory into basically 3 kingdoms: Galilee, Judea, and Samaria, which they call Judea, and the eastern areas, which don't matter. And they gave one to each of his sons. So Galilee was ruled by Herod Antipas, who managed to hang on to the place for about 40 years. And this includes Nazareth, where Jesus was born. Archelaus got Judea, but he couldn't hang on to it. So in 6 CE, the Romans took it over directly, and they ruled it from Caesarea on the coast. This is the Roman governors ruled it from then on until basically the collapse of Judea. Meantime, the high priest and the temple were in Jerusalem over here. Just to give you an idea of scale, it's probably 3 or 4 days on foot from Nazareth to Jerusalem, and maybe 2 from Caesarea to Jerusalem. I'm going to give population guesstimates, and I stress that these are just guesses. So in the first year of the Common Era, we have maybe 45 to 60 million people living in the Roman Empire. Of that number, somewhere between 4 and 7 million Jews lived in the Roman Empire. That means that they were somewhere around 5 to 10% of the population. That was a significant number.
Wow.
Most of those Jews, and again, these are guesses, most of these Jews lived outside of Judea and Galilee. This has been true ever since the end of the first exile. The Persians allowed the Jews to come back to Jerusalem. Most of them did not. They were scattered all over the Mediterranean and the Persian Empire, what became the Roman Empire. This has been true all along. Jesus was probably crucified in the year 33. Some say the year 30. At that time, we have about 75 to 100 people who believed in Jesus, disciples, apostles of Jesus. All of them are Jews in the year 30, or 33. By the year 100, the end of the first century, we have maybe, and again, these are guesses, 7,500 to 8,000. I've seen numbers as high as 10,000, but even the guy who said that thinks it's a little bit high. At that time, we had, again, out of that 7,500, maybe 1,000 were Jews. So what happened between 33 and 100? Well, two things. Sometime shortly after Jesus was crucified, his disciples started missionizing to the Gentiles. And that's where you get Paul and Barnabas, and you get a split between the Jesus followers who wanted to stick to the Jews and those who wanted to go out and proselytize all around the Roman world. The other thing that happened was in the year 66, the Jews revolted against Rome. This was the Jews in Judea and Galilee, not the rest of the Jews around the Roman world. And the main thing that happened there is that in the year 70, the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. This included not only the temple and the priesthood, but also the Jerusalem headquarters of the church. The church, the Jesus movement, the followers of Jesus, had their headquarters in Jerusalem until the year 70, when the Romans destroyed the whole city. That included the church and most of the leaders of the Jerusalem church, which were all Jews. James, the brother of Jesus, Peter, etc., or their followers, or their successors. So around the year 35, around the time Jesus was crucified, we have a number of sects in Judaism. We have the Pharisees, who were the scholars. These were the people who were studying the law, who were trying to interpret the law, and who wanted all Jews to follow the law. They were mostly, if not lower class people themselves, they worked with the lower class. And according to Josephus, they were very popular among people as a whole. And then we have the Sadducees, who were the aristocracy and the priesthood in Jerusalem. They liked things the way they were. They were more or less cooperating with the Romans. And we have the Essenes, who were very cliquish. They were very isolationist. These are the people who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, who collected them. And they lived, most of them, many of them, in the desert. They were extremely fundamentalist and fanatical. They wanted nothing to do with the Sadducees and the Pharisees. And well, these are the major sects as Josephus defines them. I want to make it clear there were not very many. There were probably 15, 20,000 total among all three, if that. And I'm giving high numbers. Remember, 500,000 Jews living in Judea and Galilee, 20,000 maybe with these three sects combined. So again, we're talking about a small group of people, all of whom were very active in discussions and arguments and disagreements, but the bulk of the people just went about their daily lives. And then finally, we have the Jesus movement. And this is the name that scholars give to the original followers of Jesus for several reasons. They were the earliest believers in Jesus. That's how we define them. And they were all Jews. This was a sect within Judaism. They were not trying to be separate. So we call them the Jesus movement up until about the year 90, 95, 100. You have all kinds of disagreements. I dated around 92 when the Emperor Nerva recognized them as a separate religion. At that point, we start speaking about Christianity. There were a few references to Christians and Christianity before that. They may be anachronistic. So after the year 70, when the temple was destroyed, we have the four sects. Sadducees disappeared because Jerusalem, where they all lived, was destroyed. They kind of much disappeared after that. The Essenes disappeared after the Romans finished mopping up Masada and the other parts of the Dead Sea. So now we're left with these two Jewish sects who are competing to become normative Judaism. But after 70, the Jesus movement has fewer and fewer leaders who are ethnically Jewish. More of them are Gentiles who have become followers of Jesus. So by the 2nd century, they're Christianity, they're not Judaism anymore. Meantime, the Pharisees much more gradually become rabbinic Judaism. It took about 400 or 500 years before Jewish communities generally accepted them accepted the rabbis as their leadership. This, by the way, is why many of us do not talk about the parting of the ways between Christianity and Judaism. It didn't quite work that way. Both of these are religions that developed out of Second Temple Judaism. Christianity is a sibling, not a daughter, of Rabbinic Judaism. One last point before we move on. We don't know very much about what happened in the first century. Up until about the year 130 BCE, almost everything we have in source material is Christian. The New Testament, a lot of things that didn't make it into the New Testament. We have Josephus, who was writing about the year 85 or 90. He may have drawn on Christian sources. We have a few other things. Everything we have is pretty much Christian and has to be read with that in mind, because they're not trying to be objective historians. Even Josephus, who was probably fairly objective, wasn't even trying to be objective entirely. But we have to bear that in mind when we look at our sources. So, question, why wouldn't the Jews be interested in Jesus? Put another way, why did only a fraction of 1% of all Jews ever believe in the Jesus movement? Once again, here are the numbers. We're talking about 500,000 Jews minimum in Judea and Galilee, 4 million Jews in the empire. At most, 1,000 Jews believed in Jesus. So that's really a small number. Well, the reasons go back to the basic principles of the Jesus movement. There are 3 things that are critical to the Jesus movement and that they used to solve the problem of why was Jesus crucified. They came up with belief in the individual resurrection of Jesus. Jesus rose from the dead 3 days after he was crucified, which happened tomorrow, will be celebrated tomorrow. Second point, they believed that Jesus was the Messiah after he had died. In fact, there's a lot of scholarly argument that Jesus never claimed to be the Messiah in his lifetime. That's debatable, but he certainly didn't make a point of it. But after he died, you start to see the Jesus movement claiming he was the Messiah. And finally, believe that Jesus' crucifixion brought salvation. You had to believe in crucifixion as repentance for sin in order to be saved from hell. These 3 things were critical to explaining the crucifixion of Jesus in the year 33, because the Jesus movement didn't expect it. You can see that even in the New Testament and the Gospels. They were all stunned. The disciples all fled back to Galilee. They weren't expecting this to happen. 2 other things, not critical to explaining the crucifixion, but which became central to Christianity, is the belief that Jesus was born of a virgin and the belief that Jesus was in some way God. All 5 of these pose problems for the Jews. Belief in the individual resurrection of Jesus first. There was a common belief in the resurrection of the dead, not a universal one among Jews in the Second Temple. The Sadducees certainly did not believe in it. The Essenes probably did, and the Pharisees definitely did. All those who did believe in it believed it would happen at the end of days, when the world as we knew it came to an end. God brought down his kingdom. God established peace on earth with will to men. But that's when the resurrection would happen, and it would happen to everyone at once. There is nothing, and I've checked this with several scholars, there is nothing in Jewish belief in Second Temple times that says it would happen to one person first and then to others. Contrary, Jesus was the only person resurrected according to the Jesus movement, and quite obviously, the world didn't end. So there was no foundation in Jewish law or tradition for Jews to accept the idea that Jesus was resurrected by himself. Second point, Jesus was believed in the Messiah, even though he had already died. Messiah, which in Hebrew is Mashiach and in Greek is Christos, just means anointed. There's an anointed leader. The kings were generally anointed. Occasionally the high priest was anointed, not quite as often. But the idea is that the leader of the people, as part of the ceremony of coronation, what we now call a coronation, he was anointed with oil as a sign that he was now the leader and that God had cast his favor on him or whatever. But it took on other meanings. At the end of, in around 535, 538, when the Persians conquered the Babylonians, and Cyrus of Persia allowed the Jews to go back to Jerusalem, which is common Persian policy, and he gave them funds to rebuild the temple. Second Isaiah hails Cyrus as Messiah. He says, "Thus says the Lord, Cyrus is anointed one, Mishicho, is anointed one." The idea, this is probably the only instance in which a non-Jew is called Messiah. Now we have a little bit of a shift in the idea that a Messiah doesn't have to be a leader of the Jews, but just somebody who helped the Jews. And that part continued. Now when we come to the Second Temple times, when the Second Temple, I'm talking pretty much late Second Temple between, say, 200 BCE and 70 CE, when the Romans destroyed the temple. There was a lot of conflict here. There was the Maccabean revolt when the Seleucids really tried to destroy the Jewish ethnicity, the Jewish religion. That was an existential threat. You begin to see in the book of Daniel calls for, he doesn't use the word Messiah, but somebody who will come and rescue the Jews. Definitely later on, you begin to see Josephus mentioned several people claiming to be the Messiah. Later on in the year 132 to 135, Rabbi Akiva will call Simon Bar Kokhba the Messiah because he led a revolt against Rome, which for a few years actually succeeded. And then Rome came in and just wiped everybody out in Jerusalem, in rebuilt Jerusalem. So the idea was Messiah will be somebody sent by God to help the Jews against the Romans. I just want to read a little bit from the Psalms of Solomon, which were written probably in the 1st century BCE. "See, O Lord, and raise up for them their king, the son of David, to rule over your servant Israel, the time known to you. Undergird him with the strength to destroy the unrighteous rulers, to purge Jerusalem from Gentiles, and trample her to destruction. With wisdom and in righteousness to drive out the sinners from the inheritance." And then he skips a little bit. "There will be no unrighteousness among them in his days, for all shall be holy, and their king shall be the Lord Messiah." That was the general idea, although I do have to say, it's been pointed out to me, not all messiahs in that time were militaristic. And there were also king messiahs and priest messiahs, and even once a prophet messiah. But there was two things they had in common. Messiah was going to make life better for the Jews somehow, and the Messiah would be alive as he did so. I'm going to read one more brief passage from the 4th book of Ezra, which is 1st century CE, probably late. "For my son, the Messiah, shall be revealed with those who are with him, and those who remain shall rejoice 400 years. And after these years, my son, the Messiah, shall die, and all who draw human breath." And then the world goes back to silence for a few years, and then it becomes the paradise again. So this was common Jewish thinking. Everybody, for all their different ideas about the Messiah, he would be a priest, he'd be a king, he would be this, he would make war, he would make peace, but he would make life better for the Jews, and he would be alive. So Jesus had died, and life for the Jews was still terrible. There's one other thing I didn't bring in here. The Jesus movement began to say that Jesus was the Messiah, not for what he had done, but for what he was going to do. And again, this was an idea foreign to the Jews. It's okay, you can say he's going to do it, but he hasn't done it yet. So, third point. Believe that Jesus' crucifixion brought salvation. And this is going to get a little complicated because I have to jump back and forth a little on, but I'll start with this point. What do the Jews believe about salvation? Salvation is a tricky thing. Do you believe that you're going to heaven when you die? Not all Jews did. The Sadducees in particular did not. Are you going to live a good life? Is that salvation? It wasn't well defined, but which brings to my point, Jews were more focused on life than on the afterlife, life after death. There was a lot of talk about resurrection and revenge, but again, the focus of almost all Jews, to the extent that they thought about it at all, was focused on this life. And the key to this was obeying the law. Jesus argued constantly about what the law should be. Even Jesus gets involved in that. When he talks about the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, and how to obey, he's not talking about whether to obey the Sabbath laws. He's talking about how to obey them. And this was a standard argument that the Pharisees had all the time. The key was, what does it mean to obey the law, and how do we do it? That's where salvation comes from. And this is a tricky one, and it's a hugely complicated one. I'm only going to cover a little bit. Jews believe that sin and repentance were each person's responsibility. Back in First Temple times, sin was largely, and repentance were largely the job of the nation or the community. That's why when bad things happened to people, it was because the nation had sinned. They had gone after idol worship. Individual sins like murder, stealing, adultery, this was the province of the judges, not judges of the book of Judges, judges under the king. It was their job. It wasn't God's job specifically to punish somebody who committed murder. And again, a little bit complicated there, but Second Temple times, they began to move more toward individual for a lot of complicated reasons. But this is where they said the fathers shall no more eat sour grapes. The fathers will no longer be responsible for the children's sins or the other way around. Each person's responsible for his own sins. That's pretty much a quote from Jeremiah and Ezekiel. Both of them said almost the same thing. And both of these prophets lived during the first exile in Babylonia. Well, actually, Jeremiah got kicked out to Egypt, and Ezekiel went to Babylonia. But the idea was, you're responsible for sins. You can repent for sins. You bring a sin offering or guilt offering to the temple and do a few other things, and that cleanses you of sin. You're responsible for sin, and you're responsible for your own salvation. Jesus' followers, on the other hand, they were focused on life after death. Again, a lot of complex reasons for that. They thought that belief in salvation, belief in Jesus was more important than the law, and they insisted that no one could escape from sin on their own. They needed help from outside. Again, this was to explain the crucifixion. I'm speaking as a historian, not a theologian. They had to explain the crucifixion, and this was the explanation they came up with. And backing up just a second, we don't know anything about what the Jesus movement thought from the time of the crucifixion until the first of Paul's letters, which was probably about 50 CE. So we're talking about a 15 to 20-year span during which they obviously developed the basic theology and had a lot of time to do it in, but we have no idea how they actually came up with these ideas. Just know that all of a sudden, Paul's writing in the year 49 or 50, his first letter to the Thessalonians, in which he lays out a lot of these points. But all of these points were contrary to the way Jews looked at the concept of sin, repentance, and salvation. Next point, Jesus was born of a virgin. This was not, as I say, necessary to explain the crucifixion, and was probably not original. By original, I mean early first century, mid first century, probably late in the first century. How do we know this, or how do we believe this? Paul wrote his letter to the Corinthians. I don't have it out here. I'm sorry, to the Galatians, around 53 or 54, in which he talks about God sent his son born of a woman. It's a perfect place for him to say born of a virgin. He doesn't say it. It says born of a woman, and it goes on. So Paul, his knowledge of Jesus is kind of mixed, but he doesn't seem to be aware that there was this idea about Jesus is born of a virgin. So it probably comes along a little bit later, by, say, the year 70 or 80. Why does it come along at all? It's not in the Jewish tradition. There's no idea of a virgin birth, but there is in the Roman world. Venus, or Aphrodite, was born from Zeus's thigh, hence the name parthenogenesis. Parthenos is another word for Athena, hence the Parthenon. I'm sorry, not Aphrodite. Athena was born from Zeus's thigh. And there are, under Mithraism and other things, there are some traditions in the Greek, Roman, and Gentile world generally of a virgin birth. So this might have appealed. I also wanted to connect back and forth, but again, I don't want to get into the details of how Matthew used or misused the translation of Isaiah to get there. Finally, we had the belief that Jesus was in some way God. Now, this probably was early on. We have hints of it in the earlier Gospels, which are written between 70 and 90, most likely. There's a couple of hints in some of Paul's letters. It's explicit in the Gospel of John, which is the last of the four Gospels written about the year, maybe 95, maybe even 100. The Jews, however, believed in an absolute separation of human and divine. There is communication between God and man, but there's no mingling of it. God is up here, humans are down here. There is no, certainly by the Second Temple time, there is no idea that one can become part of the other. But in the Roman world, there was such a thought. Romulus, the founder of Rome, becomes a god. The emperors became gods. Usually after they died, Caligula tried to speed up the process. Greek myths, Heracles or Hercules, son of Zeus, is a demigod. There are lots of demigods. So this was something that the Roman world could relate to. And again, I'm not going to get into why the Jesus movement developed this idea, it's just that they did. And again, it was not something that Jews could in any way relate to. Now, there's a common thread through all these 5 points that I made, and that's behavior or belief. The Jews were far more concerned with how people behaved than what they believed. Remember, the key to salvation is obeying the law. Whether you believe in the law or not, you obey it in some way. There were a few things that you had to believe. You had to believe in the existence of God. You had to believe in that Moses gave the Torah on Mount Sinai, or received the Torah on Mount Sinai. Later on, in the second centuries, the rabbis would insist that you have to believe in life after death, or you have to believe in the resurrection. That's a sine qua non, but that comes a little later. Right now, it's very few things you have to believe. It's all how you have to behave. So you can hold different beliefs within a range, not completely out of line, but mostly you had to behave. And this brings to a third point. Gentiles could do what they want. The Jews were not concerned with Gentile belief. And there are a number of reasons for that I'm going to go into in a few minutes. But they were concerned with how the Gentiles behaved. When the Gentiles worked with the Jews, or at least didn't go after the Jews, as they occasionally did, the Jews were fine with that. You could believe what you want. When the Gentiles attacked Jews, as they did in Rome once, in Alexandria a couple of times, then the Jews had a problem, but otherwise not. But the Jesus movement made belief its first priority. All of the 5 things that I just listed that were in conflict between the Jesus movement and the Jews were matters of belief. And the basic belief that you have to believe in Jesus, that you have to believe that Jesus died for your sins in order to be saved from hell and go to heaven, that's a matter of belief, not of behavior. Nonetheless, those Jews who heard about Jesus thought that the beliefs of his followers made no sense. What the Gentiles believed, they didn't care. What the Jews believed, they did care, and they mocked them about it, or they ignored them. But as long as they behaved, they didn't care. So when Peter, for example, follows Jewish law in matters of diet, in matters of circumcision, in matters of keeping the Sabbath, the Jews said, fine, you're an idiot to believe what you believe, but you're behaving okay, so geh gesundheit. Just a 15, well, anyway. Again, as long as the Jews behaved, fine. But there was one behavior that the Jews couldn't allow. When the Jewish followers of Jesus begin preaching Jesus to the Gentiles, this puts the Jewish community in danger. And this is why This is an important part that I want to get into that will explain a great deal about why the Christians felt the Jews were persecuting them. There's something called the Pax Deorum, peace of the gods. This was a Roman practice or a Roman concept that they practiced throughout the Roman Empire. Rome saw the gods not the way the Semitics saw the gods. All the Semitic peoples, Jews, etc., to them, the gods gave the law, or the gods instructed the king to give the law and backed up the king in the law. The Romans saw the gods differently. Gods were there to protect the state, to grant it victory in war, see the prosperity of the city, to basically see that the Roman Empire prospered. This is before, even or the Roman Republic prospered. In return for protecting the state and granting it victory in war, everybody in the empire had a civic duty to honor the gods of the empire and their city. Because this is because if the gods were not honored, you give them incense, you make sacrifices before them, you acknowledge them. This is basically that was the extent of worship, was burning incense and making sacrifices. If you didn't do that, the gods would get angry and would withdraw their protection from the city and the empire, and that made it a form of treason. And this is the actual word that the Romans used. This was treason, not to honor the gods. Well, most of the empire, they were polytheistic. They could add some more gods. They didn't have to honor all the gods all at once. They had to honor some of the Roman gods. They could pick them. They usually had to honor the god of their city, which was another Roman god. They had to keep this up in order to keep the gods satisfied, in order to give Rome prosperity. The Jews, however, couldn't do this because they were strict monotheists. By this time, by the time Rome comes along, the Jews are absolute monotheists. We worship our own God. We do not accept any other gods. We do not. It's idolatry to worship any other god. But they got an exemption from this because Rome respected antiquity, also ethnicity. You are who you believe in your gods, the gods that you have, Isis, Cybele, Yahweh, whatever, because your ancestors had this god. And actually, you can no more change your god. You can no more believe in Cybele if you used to worship Isis than you can change who your parents were. This was Roman thinking. But also, Rome respected tradition. If you were an ancient tradition, Rome would say, all right, you're an idiot, but we'll accept it. So, for example, the decree of the Emperor Claudius around the year 42. This is quoted in Josephus. It will therefore be fit to permit the Jews who are in all the world under us to keep their ancient customs without being hindered so to do. Claudius allowed the Jews an exemption from what the Jews called idolatry. He would not force them to idol worship. He would not force them to honor the gods of the state because their ancient customs prohibited it. But, and I do charge them also to use this kindness to them in moderation and not to show a contempt of the superstitions, observances of other nations, and to keep their own laws only. When he says superstition, I'm not quite sure if that's the right translation. It basically means a belief that has no basis in fact, or belief regardless of fact. I'm not sure he meant that because there are other Roman writers who dismiss lots of things as superstition and therefore contemptuous of it. Nonetheless, I mean, the Jews couldn't worship other gods, but they often took care to be polite, to be courteous to those around them. Lots of Jews held public office, which normally means you have to take part in the ceremonies to honor the gods. They couldn't do that, but they would attend the ceremony to show that they were acknowledging or being courteous to the people who worship. In other words, they didn't try to mock the Gentiles for worshiping other gods or stop them or do anything against them. And they even showed a basic courtesy, said, yes, we acknowledge it. Turn about the other way. There were many Jews who liked to attend Jewish services and festivals, They generally did not convert to Judaism because that would go against Claudius's decree. That would, and because they were not ethnic Jews, they could be subject to the charge of treason. And in fact, around the year 80, a cousin of the emperor was actually executed for converting to Judaism and thereby becoming a traitor to Rome. But he was an official, and so they had to make an example of him. But most of the time, non-Jews just came to services. They sat at home. They attended Jewish festivals at home, in the synagogues. These are called theosebes, God-fearing. And there are actually several levels of it that many people go into. We don't know how many there were, but there were a significant number. And oftentimes they would go to a Jewish service in the morning, and on their way home from the synagogue, they would stop at a local pagan temple and burn incense to the gods there. Didn't matter to the Jews at all. But it did matter to the Jesus movement. Along comes, for example, St. Paul, who's the major person speaking, preaching, missionizing to the Gentile world, to the Greek and Roman world. So Paul, this is from Acts. Paul stood up in the synagogue and with a gesture began to speak, "You Israelites." So he knows he's talking to the Jews, the Israelites, and others who fear God. Listen, he knows he's talking to the theosebes, God-fearers. And what does he say to them? What pagans sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. And demons does not mean what we mean by demon. Demon is a lesser kind of divinity. Socrates had his daemon, for example. So, but what it means is lesser beings that are like God, but have some kind of divinity. I do not want you to be partners with demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the table of the Lord and the table of demons. In other words, if you want to follow Jesus, you've got to give up the demons. You've got to give up your other gods. Side note here, I'm using the New Revised Standard Version translation, but I think they're wrong when they said pagans, because pagans is a word that really comes along a couple of hundred years after Paul. The Greek word, and I don't know Greek, but I looked it up. The Greek word is ethne, meaning nations, goyim in Hebrew. Same word, the nations. When they say the Gentiles, it's another way of translating ethne or Greeks. So pagans is not exactly the word they should use. Anyway. So what is Paul doing? He's doing exactly what Claudius had told the Jews not to do, not to show contempt for the superstitious observances of other nations. So how do the Jews and the Roman authorities respond? Because by doing this, Paul is putting the synagogue at risk. He's violating the decree of the Romans, and the Romans could now come and punish the Jews for allowing Paul to do this in the synagogue. This is Paul in Corinthians, 2 Corinthians. 5 times I have received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I received a stoning. And he goes on to say also that he was shipwrecked a few times, but that's not a punishment. 40 lashes minus 1 is actually a specific Jewish punishment. 39 lashes, you don't want to do the maximum, so you do it minus 1. And it's a Jewish punishment. Interestingly, it's a punishment that the victim or the person being punished has to accept. He doesn't have to take it. But if he doesn't accept it, he's excluded from the community. Paul wanted to stay in the community, so he allowed the Jewish authorities to punish him 40 lashes minus 1, and then he goes back and preaches some more in another community, where they also give him the 40 lashes. The Romans also beaten with rods is a specifically Roman punishment. The Jews and the Romans saw themselves doing this because he's breaking the Pax Deorum. Paul saw it differently. In 1 Thessalonians, it says, the Jews believe God and oppose everyone by hindering us from speaking to the Gentiles so that they may be saved. No, they're hindering him from speaking to the Gentiles so they don't get in trouble with the Roman authorities. This is the classic example of how the same act is seen different ways by different actors in it. And Paul does say this. He says the Jews killed Jesus, but only in Thessalonians. In the 6 other letters that we know are written by Paul, and he may have written others, He never says anything against the Jews. In Romans, for example, he talks about the Jews. God made the Jews stubborn in order to give the Gentiles time to be saved, because it's expecting the end of the world to happen right then. And the more time he has to get the Gentiles saved, the better off. And as soon as the Jews accept Jesus, God will bring the world to an end. So God is actually doing this to help the Gentiles, not to hurt the Jews. But nonetheless, he still has this. So Paul's not consistent. Next question. Now we understand why the Jews were indifferent to Jesus and why they even rejected Jesus. Why does this bother the Christians? They're out there preaching to the Gentiles. By the end of the first century, they've got 7 Gentile believers for every 1 Jewish believer, more or less. They're starting to, the leaders of the Christian community are, well, now they're Christians, not Jesus movement, and the leaders are starting to be all Gentiles. Why can't they let the Jews go? Why does it bother them? Well, first of all, the Jesus movement claimed its version was the only true one, and they wanted all other Jews to agree with them. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Essenes kind of made the same argument, but they didn't hang on to it that much. The Pharisees and the Sadducees argue vociferously with each other and then go off to the temple to make the sacrifice. The Essenes withdrew into the Qumran caves in Masada, because for a bunch of fanatical reasons, but they didn't. But they're small. They're much smaller group, maybe 1,000, 2,000 people. So, also they didn't condemn each other to hell. Yeah, the Pharisees didn't agree with the Pharisees. Tongue twisting. They didn't say, "Oh, you're going to hell because you don't see it my way. You may go to hell, or you may not be resurrected if you don't behave the way I want you to." But your belief is not, that's you. The Jesus movement did just that. You have to agree with us or be damned for all eternity. You have to agree that Jesus died to save you from sin. Basically, that point. If you don't believe in that, you're going to hell. And not only that, the various Jesus followers condemned each other Jesus followers. They believed in Jesus, but not in the right way. You'll find this particularly in the second letter of James and the first letter of Peter, where the writers warn against the Docetists. This means people who believe that Jesus died for their sins and so on, but he only appeared to be human. The Docetists comes to the Greek word dokisis, meaning to appear. He only appeared to be human. He only appeared to die on the cross. And so they're condemned. These 2 letters, James and Peter, warn their readers, don't follow these people. You'll go to hell if you do. And this is a psychological point, and a somewhat subjective one, that I can point to a lot of hints, but they never come out and say it. So I'm going to throw this out. Christians needed to have the Jews agree with them in order to validate that they were right. And we see a lot of this, not so much stated in so many words, but we see this throughout Christian history, from the destruction of the Second Temple even to the present day. Christians want Jews to say, yes, you were right. There are several reasons for this. One of them, the first of them, is a historical reason. In the first, and especially in the second and third centuries, when the Christian missionaries are going out to the Roman world, the Romans, the Gentiles, kept asking, why should we believe in your Jesus? Especially when, the Jews don't. It's not the fact that Jesus was a crucified criminal in the Gentiles' eyes only made it worse. But why should we believe in Jesus? Paul admits this around the year 54, 55. We proclaim Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. So they recognize that the crucifixion is a problem. The Gentiles, they call him now, the pagan philosopher Celsus, who lived in the late 2nd, early 3rd century. And this is a quote from Origen, who actually, we know about 75% of what Celsus wrote because Origen quotes him, honestly, which is something rather rare in these times. Celsus was a pagan philosopher who studied Judaism and Christianity very carefully. And he knew what he was talking about. And he was probably the primary philosophical opponent from the Roman world that the Christians had to deal with. And so he asks this question: what God appeared among men, is received with incredulity, and that too when appearing to those who expect him, meaning the Jews. The Jews were expecting a Messiah, and yet when he came up, the Jews received him with incredulity. And why is he not recognized by those who have long been looking for him? Again, the Jews. So the pagans are saying, the Gentiles are saying, why should we accept Jesus? His own people didn't believe in him. They were incredulous, and they didn't recognize him. Christians had to come up with an answer to this question. And they couldn't use the answers that I've given you in the beginning about, well, they couldn't accept these beliefs and so forth. It just didn't fit, because they had to make it fit. Christianity is now claiming to be the successor, the supersession of Judaism. They're the true Judaism. And so they had to explain why Jesus really fit into Judaism and why the Jews didn't accept. So there's all kinds of things. You know, John has Jesus say, you are the children of the devil, you're stubborn, you're rebellious. But they came up with all kinds of explanations for this. This is the basis of, frankly, Christian anti-Judaism. So next point, I got into this a little bit earlier, moved a little premature. It often happens, and by the way, how am I doing on time? I'm running a little slow. Yeah. It often happens that people are more angered by indifference than by hatred. Famous quote from Elie Wiesel: the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. You see this starting even in the New Testament. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. You're being persecuted by the powers that be. Therefore, you must be doing something right. Hatred moves persecution. Indifference does not. If you're reviled for the name of Christ, you are blessed. Again, same idea. If you're indifferent, you're not going to persecute people you're indifferent to. You're not going to revile people you're indifferent. And the Jews, by and large, were indifferent. So the Christians had to come up with, the Jews hated Jesus because this would give them more self-satisfaction, more assurance that they were correct. Or once again, same quote: the Jews hate me because I'm hindering them from preaching to the Gentiles. No, the Jews were punishing him, and the Romans were punishing him for breaking the Pax Theorum, but this is how Paul chose to see it. To sum up, I'm not too late. Why won't the Jews accept Jesus, and why is this a problem for the Christians? Jesus' movement in Christianity insisted on too many things that the Jews could not accept. And basically, they insisted on belief where the Jews insisted on behavior. And it was the beliefs that they couldn't accept, but also the behavior. Christians stopped doing things that the Jews insisted on them behaving: sacrifice, circumcision, following the dietary laws, obeying the Sabbath. All these things, they didn't ask the Gentiles to do it, but if the Gentiles claimed they were Jews, then the Jews said, okay, you have to do it. You want to be Jewish, this is what you have to do. And the Christians are saying, no, you want to be true Jews, the successor to the Jews, you have to believe. And the Christians needed Jewish acceptance of Jesus as validation for Christianity and to persuade the Roman world to accept Jesus. And I'm still going to stop here, but I could quote Augustine saying that the Jews are to be preserved. Augustine is writing about the 5th century, after Christianity has become the official religion of the Roman Empire, and after Jews are starting to be persecuted for continuing to be Jews. Augustine says, no, you have to preserve them in a second-class state, but you have to preserve them as witnesses to the triumph of the Christianity and as part of what will happen in the end days when the Jews finally do accept Christianity. He doesn't use validation, but he says, we need the Jews around so that one day they will finally become Christian. And we see that right up to the present day. And that is the end of my sharing. So